Hello, and welcome to episode 11 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I am here with Dan today through Zoom. It is May 17th, 2020. It is my mother's birthday today. That's really exciting, don't you think, Dad?
It
Good.
is,
Happy
absolutely.
birthday.
That's right.
And we are showing pictures today. So if you're able to watch the podcast through YouTube, that would be best. My dad's camera is not working today, so you won't see video of him.
Probably a good thing.
Okay. But you'll be able to see his computer screen because he's going to be sharing photographs about projects that Preserve Mecklenburg is currently working on. We started talking about that last week with Jack Pennis, and now we're continuing with some other projects that Preserve Mecklenburg has going on. You can see these pictures also at my dad's website, which is www.danmorrill.org, DANMORRILL, all one word. You can email him at danmorrill2@gmail.com, and you can follow him on Instagram at danmorrill. It's his username. So there you go, Dad. So good to talk to you today.
Well, it's great. Let me make a disclaimer first up.
Okay.
All the things that I say do not represent an official statement of the policies of Preserve Mecklenburg. They are totally and completely personal observations. So with that,
Okay.
Preserve Mecklenburg, I think, is doing really some very, very important work. And the McNinch House, which is, we talked about Frank McNinch, and I showed this photograph before, is just one of the many projects that Preserve Mecklenburg is doing. And I think it very much demonstrates what our philosophy is, and that is Preserve Mecklenburg wants to, in essence, help owners of properties to find economically viable ways to preserve historic landmarks. Now, you know, I've said a lot about Frank McNinch, and I don't need to say about it anymore. I did mention that he was the only resident of Charlotte that ever appeared on the cover of Time magazine.
Right. You did a podcast. We did a podcast that was totally devoted to him.
Absolutely.
If you want to go back and listen to it.
Right. And this was a 1931 edition of Time magazine, and there is Frank McNinch, and there's his house. And I also showed the next picture last week of the McNinch house, which of course is then on 23 acres of land when it was built in the 1920s. And obviously that land has been sold off. And now instead of 23 acres with the McNinch house, there's 3 acres with the McNinch house.
Yeah, a lot of people asked what that picture was, what house that was in that picture. And it's the Frank McNinch house that is in that picture we showed last week that's on the corner of Sharon Road and Sharon Lane.
Exactly. And I hope I'm going to be able to, since I made this full screen, I don't know if I can move the screen up and down, which could cause some problems. But anyway, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
This is a colonial revival style house. Colonial revival style is one of the many styles of architecture that tried to mimic the past. And in the case of the Frank McNinch house, it was trying to go back to the colonial period, going back to Mount Vernon and the fine plantation houses that used to exist throughout the South. And therefore it's called colonial revival. And it's in very, very good condition, to say the least. Now, here is the issue, and this is really a critical issue. First of all, just to make a very basic point, and I know I'm really sounding like a professor today, but this is serious stuff. This property is zoned R3. Now, what that means is that the owner of this property, because there are 3 acres of land, 3 times 3 is 9. So the owner can put 9 houses on this particular plot of land by right. He doesn't have to get a rezoning. But it is a designated historic landmark. And therefore, we had to get the approval of a plan by the Historic Landmarks Commission. Now, the issue is, what do you do with preservation? Because the fundamental reality is that this house has no protection whatsoever against demolition. All the owner would have to do is apply to the Landmarks Commission, wait 1 year, and they could tear it down. What we at Preserve Mecklenburg have tried to do is to come up with a plan that is acceptable to the owner and acceptable to the Historic Landmarks Commission, that will allow him to get the greatest economic return, the owner, from the property, but will protect the historic house. And that's been done in 2 ways. First of all, the owner, if this plan is approved by the Historic Landmarks Commission, will put an easement on the property that will, on the house, that will assure its preservation in perpetuity. It'll never be torn down. Now, let me show you the plan that was taken to the Historic Landmarks Commission. Can you see the cursor?
Yeah, yes.
Here is the historic house. I showed it to you.
Okay,
This is Sharon Lane down here.
okay.
Now, you will note that there is a vista that is still preserved up to the house.
Right.
And this, the lot on which the house sits, over here, and this vista to the house will remain a designated historic landmark. But
So
you will note that there are 8 other houses being built on the property. 1,
yeah.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, there are going to be some people who say, oh, this is awful. This is horrible. That wonderful front lawn is going to be filled up
With houses.
But,
How big, how many square feet would those new houses be?
well, it varies. The footprint's about 2,000 square feet.
Okay.
But they could go up to about 4,000 square feet.
Oh, okay.
Because this is very, very expensive real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to emphasize that by right, he can put 9 houses on the property.
Yeah.
Also, if we don't come up with a plan that is acceptable to the owner, if he wished to, he could file and tear the house down in a year.
Mm-hmm.
So what we are doing is reaching a compromise where he gets fair market value for his property, because each of these lots will sell in the neighborhood of $300,000. So he will get a fair market value for his property, but he won't tear the house down, even if he wanted to tear the house down, because it's going to have a preservation easement put on it.
And you'll still be able to see the house from Sharon Lane. That's right. What the vista's for. So
now that cul-de-sac, that little cul-de-sac there.
Yeah.
That will allow people to drive up and look at the house. Now, we hope that the Planning Commission will allow us to eliminate that. The only reason you have that cul-de-sac is that, believe it or not, these lots have to have street frontage, and by having that cul-de-sac, you can get all those lots there. So
Okay.
we hope they'll give us a variance, but there are going to be people that are going to drive down Sharon Lane and they're going to say, "Oh my God, isn't that awful?" They're building all those houses on the front lawn of that house. Now, what's your attitude about it, Mary Diane?
Well, I think that what you said is right, that usually that you have to come up with a compromise, because I've watched you enough over the decades to know that if you dig your heels in with historic preservation, it usually the property ends up getting torn down. That's traditionally what's happened a lot
Well,
of
that's
times.
exactly right. And that's exactly what Preserve Mecklenburg is trying to do.
Like I remember the Masonic Temple specifically. I remember how hard that you fought to save that, and it ended up being torn down. So
Now, Preserve Mecklenburg doesn't just deal with fancy big houses. This is on Booker Avenue in Washington Heights.
we talked about Booker Avenue before, that it was named for Booker T. Washington.
That's right, and this was a grocery store. Now, I know that it was built by a man by the name of Patterson, and I know it was operational by 1925. And Charlotte used to be full of these types of neighborhood grocery stores.
What is it now? It's not
empty. It's not.
Okay.
It doesn't have. It's totally and completely empty. Now it's for sale. Now this is one that Preserve Mecklenburg is trying to work with the owner to find a preservation solution, and it's going to be tough. Now, just to give you a little bit more history, a man by the name of Logan bought it from Mr. Patterson, or he bought it actually from someone else, but there was a very interim owner. Mr. Logan operated it for many years, so we call it the Patterson Logan Grocery Store.
Okay.
Now, the issue is, how are we going to be able to make it economically viable to keep this building? Now, some people would say, well, you ought to make it an historic site, put shelves in it, let school children come and look at what a grocery store used to look like. Those types of operations are never self-supporting. They never make money. They constantly have to be subsidized. And you run into all kinds of issues about parking. Well, the thing that we're trying to conceive is that this would be sort of a tiny house. Well, it wouldn't exactly be a tiny house, because you could put some more house behind it, because the most important thing to preserve is the street frontage of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be used for affordable housing. Now, this is very much a project in progress. We don't know whether it's going to work or not. But it's not a designated historic landmark. It's not an historic district. All the owner would have to do is file for a demolition permit and tear it down. Now, you can't fault the owner, because the owner, of course, wants to get a fair market price for their property. And, they have to be concerned about their family. They've got small children. They don't live on the property. They actually live over in Southeast Charlotte, but we've got to find a way to try to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think about trying to make this into affordable housing, Mary Diane?
Well, I would say, why do you think that building is worth saving?
because African Americans, first of all, one of the things that's a real problem with historic preservation, people think it's just beautiful architecture, like the McNich House. But these are historic artifacts. And one of the things that Black men could own, even in the age of Jim Crow, and I can tell you, strict legal segregation was totally in place when this Black man opened this grocery store in the 1920s. So it's an artifact, really, in some ways, of segregation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's an artifact of the time. And, you know, I think the question really should be turned the other way. Why do you have to tear it down? Well, the answer would be, it's in the way.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is to try to find a means where it's not in the way, that it can actually be incorporated into some sort of affordable housing. So anyway, that's that one.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the interior of the store.
Oh, okay.
You can see it's just pretty much just vacant.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some more of the store building. You think are you suggesting, and I'm not arguing with you at all.
I'm not arguing.
No, but I mean, do you think the best thing to do is just turn away and let it get torn down?
No, I mean, not me personally, but I think maybe the fact that I'm your daughter makes me a little bit biased when it comes to historic preservation.
Well, I think that's probably true.
I always think we should save stuff, but that's just me.
Now, another project that we're working on is the John and Idella Mays house. What's the time? Where are
You're
we?
doing okay. About, I know you told me to start telling you how long you've been talking.
Well, the Mays house was
about
built
15 minutes or so.
It was, well, we'll go as long as 30.
Okay.
It was built in 1902. This is what's called a shingle style house, which gets its name from the fact that the sheathing material on the exterior of the house was shingles. And you can see, this picture on the right is taken from the backyard. You can see the little stairway going up there on the left. That's the stairs to the back porch of the house.
Now tell everybody the address where the Mays house is located.
It's at 435 East Moorhead Street.
So it's
right
like
across the street from the YMCA.
Yeah, it's practically uptown. I mean, you can see in the picture.
You can see the vista. Now, I tell you, Mary Dana, from a market standpoint, views of the center city are golden. And this is a zoning classification known as TOD, T-O-D, which means transit density, basically. They want a lot of people to have their offices and living space close to the light rail lines. And this is right down Moorhead Street from the light rail line. Now here's exactly the same thing as with the McNich house. You have a man who actually restored the house. He loves the house. He's a wonderful owner.
It's a beautiful house.
But Mary Dana, he's 60 years old. I mean, he's young compared to me. But
everybody's young compared to you.
I know, it's the truth. Well, he's thinking about retirement.
Sure.
He can get $200 a square foot for this property.
And the house right now, it's being used as an office.
Yeah, I'll show you some interior. I mean, now there's the man on the top is John Mays, who's very big in textiles. In fact, he built the town of Cramerton. It was first known as Maysville before Mr. Kramer bought Mr. Mays out. That's James Wyatt, an attorney on the bottom, who owns the house. Now, it's in absolutely exquisite condition. You know, Victorian architecture was all about complexity.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't at all revivalist. It was very bold, looking toward the future. Now this stairway over here is called a waterfall stairway because of the way it comes down, and then you can see it sort of falls down.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see this very, very candlestick light
Yes.
here at the bottom of this balustrade. Now, I mean, it's just now. Look at the glass. Look at the artwork. Look at the stained glass. I mean, look at this mantle and over. I mean, it's.
Well, wait, now see, so I was going to say, we have people who are just listening. So, right, there's a picture of a very intricately made stained glass window. Where's that window in the house?
It's on the stairway. As you come down the stairway to the stairway landing, it's a U-shaped stairway.
Mm-hmm.
As you come down the landing, the windows are right in front of you, and
Okay.
the mantle's in the dining room. The one that's on the right.
The fireplace. So that's
Right.
in
Now,
the dining room.
here's the issue. He's filed for a certificate of appropriateness that will allow him to tear this house down
Oh my
on or
goodness.
after March 10th of 2021.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, you could make a lot of money. The architectural vultures will come in here and they'll buy all these mantles and buy all this glassware. You know, they're like feeding the dead, right?
Right.
Well, there really only three solutions. One would be to buy it. Well, if you look at $200 a square foot for the relatively small lot that is owned here, you're talking about $2.5 million.
How big is the lot that it's on?
Oh, I don't remember the square footage, but it's small. It's
Mm-hmm.
small. But $2.5 million it cost you to buy it.
Okay.
The other is you can try to incorporate it into a new development.
Mm-hmm.
Now, see, they can put a 12-story building on this property. Well, all the economics, what do all the economics say about this house? Tear it down.
Yeah.
Because the more you can go up from the dirt, the more money you're going to make, right? It all becomes a matter of calculation. The third option is to move it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Preserve Mecklenburg is deeply involved in trying to find a preservation solution. We can't afford to buy it. We'd like to get an option on it, but we don't have an option on it. We are doing some plans to illustrate how it can be part of a larger development.
Mm-hmm.
And we have identified a buyer relatively close by that says he is serious about moving the house to his lot if he can get the property rezoned for office. The lot that he owns is actually very close. It's in Dilworth.
Okay.
It's very close to the intersection of East Park Avenue and Euclid. So that's what we're trying to do with the Mays house. Now, this is one of our great victories. This house is on Mecklenburg Avenue, 2400 Mecklenburg Avenue. A lot of people would call it Plaza Midwood. It was actually in a neighborhood called Club Acres. This was our first major project. It was scheduled to be demolished. The picture on the left, the black and white picture,
Mm-hmm.
was made in the spring of 1928. And that's when the house was under construction.
What do you guys call this house?
This is the Knowlton Shaw house. And
Okay.
on the right, you can see it's essentially the same style as the McNitch house.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it doesn't look exactly like the McNitch house, but it's colonial revival.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here's Mayor Shaw. Mayor Shaw wanted Charlotte to have a zoo.
Mm-hmm.
And he loved elephants. And so somebody brought him a toy elephant. Victor Shaw was the mayor in the early 1950s. You can see him looking down
at the elephant.
Now, this is a very interesting thing. This is what's going to happen, subject to rezoning. It's been approved by the Historic Landmarks Commission. Now understand, this is the only thing that's on the property now.
Right. Okay.
Now,
how many acres is it?
It's not quite 3, but it's
okay.
2.5 or whatever. Well, we've come up with a plan where there will be 2 houses put in the front,
Mm-hmm.
but the view from Mecklenburg Avenue to the Knowlton Shaw House will still be preserved. Plus, the owner will put a preservation easement on the property to assure its preservation in perpetuity. It's exactly like what we're trying to do with the McNitch house, except we were successful here.
Okay.
Then in the back, if you will see, there's 1, 2, there's 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 duplexes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason these are duplexes is you can get more structures under the zoning code if you allow duplexes.
Right.
So it's exactly, now there are going to be people, I can tell you, Mary Dana, they're going to drive down Mecklenburg Avenue and they're going to say, ooh, ooh, ooh. Look at those houses that are out in front of them. But what would have happened to the house if we hadn't come up with this plan?
It would have been torn down.
It would have been torn down. I ask you again, what do you think about that?
Same thing that I thought about the McNitch.
Well, that's exactly what Preserve Mecklenburg is trying to do. It's trying to really make people understand that's the case. Now, this is a very interesting project, and it's also one that's going through rezoning. Now, this is and don't ask me how many acres, I don't remember.
I know, I keep asking you.
It's about 20 acres.
Okay.
This is an antebellum plantation house. This is Edgewood Farm, which is on Eastfield Road. It's right on the border between Huntersville and Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to, the owner had had it for sale for a long time. They could not find a buyer. Most of the buyers said, that house is just like that grocery store that I showed you. It's in the way. They want to tear it down. Now here is Eastfield Road, right here. Okay.
Okay.
Here is the historic house, right here. Okay.
Okay.
Now you
that
can.
looks like a tree. You sure that's not a tree?
I'm sorry. This is the house. Right here.
Okay. There you go.
Now you can see there's a whole bunch of development going on here.
Yeah, I see that all around.
But they have left a good portion of land with the house, which will, of course, continue to have this same vista from Eastfield Road. And this really doesn't show the whole plan because there's about 8 to 10 acres back here that's being left undeveloped. So what you've done is you've allowed development because, Dana, you gonna make it a house museum? You know, most house museums are open about every other Sunday afternoon for 6 months out of the year. I mean, they can't sustain themselves. This will most likely be used as an event center. But this is a way that we came up with a way to save the Eastfield Farm. What do you think?
Well, I've noticed a pattern that you guys are trying to maintain the vista. That seems to be really important.
And the preservation covenants on the house that assure their preservation in perpetuity. Yeah, those are 2 very, very important aspects of it, no doubt. They are. Well, what do you think?
Well, again, I think that you can't stop change, so you have to adapt. And so that's the idea behind adaptive reuse, and that's really what this is.
Well, but I can tell you right now, Mary Dana, we're going to get a lot of criticism.
Well, I'm sure
I
that's true.
guarantee you. And that's just, now this.
You've always gotten criticism, Dad. What else is new?
Well, that's true. The best way to not get criticism is to do nothing.
That's true.
Right?
That's right.
Well, now this is.
Okay, this is the last one we're going to have time to talk about.
Well,
Is
this
this the last one?
This is the last one.
Hey, all right, good. Okay.
This is Cedar Grove.
Okay.
Now, Cedar Grove is the finest plantation house in Mecklenburg County.
Where is it located? What's the address?
It's on Gilead Road.
Okay.
You go up to Interstate 77 North to exit 23. You get on Gilead Road, which is the exit road. You go west toward the river. And this house is about a mile on the right. Now, the black and white house, it's been judged to be of statewide significance. There's no other plantation house in Mecklenburg County that's been judged of statewide significance.
What were you going to say about the black and white photo? What about
the black and white photo on the left was taken in the 1930s.
Okay.
And at that time, the house inside was in bad shape. It hadn't been lived in for about 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this woman down here is Belle Banks. Now, I knew Belle Banks. She's standing in that spectacular stairway
Mm-hmm.
in Cedar Grove. And she and her husband, Dick Banks, both of whom I knew very well, really put the sweat, the blood, the tears, the fingernails into making this be restored. And that was between about 1949 and 1954 that they brought it back. Now, Preserve Mecklenburg is going to obtain an option to purchase this property. It's not endangered. The state holds an easement on this property to ensure its preservation. That is Cedar Grove. But we want to make sure we get the right kind of buyer.
Yeah.
By that I mean somebody who respects, understands, and appreciates the historic significance of what they're acquiring.
What's the picture on the bottom right?
That's the Hugh Torrance House and Store. That's right next door. It was built in 1799. And it was the father of the man who built the big plantation house.
Is it part of the same property?
It's part of the same property.
Okay.
But it's an historic site. And it's going to be real complicated trying to find out something about that. But Mary Dana, I think that pretty well describes the kind of projects, the philosophy, and the outlook of Preserve Mecklenburg. That's what we're trying to do.
Well, great. Well, thank you for that update about Preserve Mecklenburg. I think it was really interesting, the projects that you guys are working on. And thanks everybody for joining us today. And next week, we are going to be talking about NODA, because I asked my dad to tell the story of how he worked on getting that going to being what it is today. So Dad, thanks for being here, and I'll talk to you next week.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.